I'd like to call to order the special sessions for the budget hearings today, and it is November 1st, 2019. And how would you like to proceed? Brad, are you the first up, or Mike?
I'm the first up.
Okay.
But it's going to be really short for me, so. I'm going to just kick off, for a little bit, but Brad and Karen are definitely the show today.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and pass out a copy for all of you guys here.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give just a real brief, overview. And really, it's a very high level. Some of the stuff you're going to see throughout the budgeting process as you look at the different departments. They're the things as I've reviewed the preliminary budget that kind of, stuck out to me. Okay. Where's the
Clicker?
clicker?
You hit up or what do you hit?
We need to focus on technology in 2020. No, I'm just kidding.
Presentation skills.
We need to focus on seamless technology.
This will be correct when we get the new building, I guess.
Yeah, this will be perfect in the new building, don't worry.
Just have to hit enter. There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, so these are kind of the highlights that that we've kind of seen, and just want to draw your attention to. Historically, our revenue trends as projected and budgeted by the auditor's office and does the treasurer budget? And the auditor, I think this year the auditor is helping the treasurer internally. So so, for example, the forecasted revenue for this year is going to be close to 106 million, and our budget for next year is 103 million. So we're budgeting. So when we did our estimate, our budget in 2019, it was 99 million, and we're going to be 7 million, over that. So when you look at the budget numbers, if we were to budget our expenses based on what the revenues being budgeted by the county auditor, we would be 7 million more, almost 8 to 10% or 8%, So just keep that in mind when you look at the numbers. For example, this year I think we're forecasting over 5 million in interest. Okay, I know this has been a good year in interest. Next year's budget we're estimating only 2 million or 2.4 million. So just understand that the revenue numbers, I put very, very conservative. There probably should be 4 more varies in there.
Oh.
So just keep that in mind. The other thing is when you see salaries, don't think that everybody's getting a big raise this year. There's an extra pay, which equates to 3 or 4% of overall. Now the good news is the next year it should go back. So next year should be a flat raise year. So if you see 6-7% increase in the salary budget line item, just understand that there's an extra pay in there. The historic courthouse construction and the Bixby design are in the budget. I think you guys know that, but those are not routine things that we do. Another thing that I think that really happens a lot too is and I think you guys get a lot of exposure to this on road projects. It's common for the county engineer to talk about how we can't get the utilities relocated, the project's delay. So it's very common for maybe a capital budget on projects. It happens with sewer and our facilities, and also with the road, where we budget for 6 million of a project to be complete, but maybe only 2 million of it happens. There's definitely a lot of optimism from an engineering standpoint. I've seen this many years. So a lot of times you'll see capital, we never come close to spending the capital because the projects just slow down and delay. And a lot of it slides to the next year. You're going to see a lot of the thought and put into EMS, from the Fitch study into the budget. There's a lot of different components as they're looking at the training and different things that were recommended. The sheriff's continuing to reorganize their department, and also I think vacancies. There seems to be a lot of challenges in filling their staffing needs. So that's something that you'll see in the budget. And then road maintenance, last year was switched to where road maintenance is a service in charge. Our road maintenance, as you would imagine, is a pretty healthy number. So if you go and look from like 2016 to present, and you look at the services and charge numbers of the county, it almost doubles. From like 10 million to 20 million. And the reason why that is because now all the road resurfacing and stuff is considered a service and charge instead of a capital expense. Okay, so we're not out just hiring more, we're not hiring more consultants and doing more stuff. So this was just the revenue chart to kind of show you where, what we budgeted in 2019 was 99 million. Our forecast is going to be 106. And our 2020 estimate that's been put in our budget is, so we basically are at 11% increase, but I think that's because we were we were just conservative on our last year estimate, because our last year's estimate of, once again, you can kind of see how those, but if we plug in the 102, I think if Brad and I look at it, we don't see any indicators that would slow down. So if we were budgeting that, we'd probably be looking at like a 108 or 109 number.
I have a question. I looked at this last night. The property taxes, 18, we were 12.5, and 12.5 estimated for 2019. Is there a reason why that's kind of flatlined?
Well, every 3 years is when they either do basically what amounts to a drive-by reevaluation or a calculated reevaluation. So what I'm assuming happened is in 2017 that there was a reevaluation. I'm not sure which cycle it was. Then it went up to, so that's why it went from 11.2 to 12.5. This year we actually collected 12.9. So that's another example of in 2020, the estimated revenue they put back at 12.5, but there's really no reason why we wouldn't collect 12.9 again. And then, so we would collect 12.5 in 18, 12.9 in, say, 2019, say it's 12.9 again in 2020, but next year there should be another evaluation, and then we would see.
But there would be some new construction that isn't getting reflected, or?
Oh, it is. That's why it's 12.9 versus 12.5 in 2018. So that's the new construction.
You're saying 12.20 probably should be raised to 12.9.
That's the main driver of the increase.
Yeah.
Is the new construction.
And the reason why we show this to you is when you see that you'll see a budget where we're spending, because of the capital needs, where we're spending more than we're bringing in, but the number that we're projecting to bring in. Once again, if you look at the interest number, we budgeted 2.5 and it's 5.3 million, and we're back to 2.4. Now, there could be something with interest rates and stuff like that, but our cash balances that we are investing aren't going to change over the year. So that number could easily be 3 million more, just as a...
Which revenue lines does the budget commission budget?
Taxes.
Just taxes, property taxes, sales taxes? No, not interest, not service charges, okay. I thought it was just.
I mean, they approve the revenues, but in terms of actually calculating a number that where it's, in theory, should be stuck to in the budget, it's taxes.
So that's all, like I said, real brief overview. I know Brad and Karen have a lot more detail information to go through. I just kind of wanted to give you, some things that when you see, as you look, and that I noticed when I was reviewing it, so.
One question, and I like, great presentation, and,
Oh, well then, we're done, everybody.
yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah,
It's been
you're
great being
really
here.
doing well here, no.
George Costanza in on a high note.
Yeah. When you say road maintenance is now considered services and charges, I'm not sure I know what you mean by,
In the
oh,
memo,
you're
we
just
go
getting
into a
in
little
there?
bit more
Oh,
detail on
okay,
that.
okay.
It'll all,
It'll,
when you put it all together,
Okay.
we're working with the total number, it'd be probably easier to understand.
Yeah. These are obviously just revenues here. We've got expense charts.
okay, great, thank you.
All right, so go ahead and get started here. So my name's Brad Lutz, Director of Business Operations Financial Management.
First fiscal manager.
So first off, I'd like to start off with some big thank yous. First of all, to the commissioners for not firing me in the last year. So obviously, I've got a year under my belt. I thought after a year that meant I couldn't be fired. It turns out that's not the case, and Mike actually proved that by saying you're fired at the end of today, just to prove that point. So it's a little disappointing, but that's okay. So Karen obviously gets the biggest amount of thanks. Karen does an absolutely phenomenal job, not just on the day-to-day work, but obviously making sure that this budget was entered and entered appropriately, double-checking numbers. Jen and Sarah, big thanks for obviously helping us with the books and helping us with budget, setting up these budget meetings and so forth. As we can imagine, that's a very difficult job to do, working with all these elected officials. Marissa, who did a great job on a presentation that no one will see. Thank you so much for that. And of course, for Mike, for all his guidance through the process and making sure that we're going down the right path for you. So
Thank you.
thanks for all that. So you have a memo in your book, starting on page 1, called the 2020 Preliminary Budget Memo. Kind of really take that title seriously, preliminary budget. Obviously, this is what has been submitted as estimated revenue and request for appropriation. So it should be noted for those listening at home that this is in no way, shape, or form final, that we will have a number of departments visiting you in the next several weeks who will make a case for their budget, and they will ultimately obviously have to answer questions that you have for them prior to you making an approval of the budget. I guess officially that we were scheduled for that in what, early December, or was it late November? I don't know. So before Christmas, Merry Christmas. So was there only 54 days till Christmas now or something? So what I've done here is tried to take a very high level with the budget and then bring it down all the way to the department level. So I first talk about breaking down the budget into fund classes. And these are the general, special, capital, debt service, agency, enterprise, and internal service funds. Not all of these funds can be taken in total for a review. I mean, you could, but it wouldn't give you necessarily good information. For example, the special revenue agency funds are two that are handled. Each department and/or agency has a separate fund within those areas that are not related to the other funds within that type. So taking those in total would not yield good information. But obviously, as individual funds or departments, those can be discussed and will be discussed later. But I did, later on in this presentation, go ahead and do total reviews of the general fund, capital fund, debt service, and agency funds. So the next level of analysis would be going down to the fund level, the general fund obviously being a fund class of itself. So an evaluation at the high level of the general fund is, of course, a review of the general fund itself. But then we want to go down and look at the specific funds, particularly, once again, in the special revenue areas. There are, once again, a number of departments that operate totally within special revenue funds like JFS, or a number of elected officials that, for the most part, operate out of the general fund, but have special revenue funds that they can utilize for different purposes. Frankly, a lot of those evaluations will be done by the individual departments when they come in and speak to you. The departments that are coming in are either departments that are spend a significant amount of the budget, so this would be like the sheriff, engineer, JFS, or departments that are seeing significant differences in their budget from 2019 to 2020, generally related to salary or personnel changes. And then final level of analysis is at the department level. So once again, using the general fund as an example, we have multiple departments within the general fund, and those departments should be evaluated individually as well as the general fund as a whole, obviously. So revenue, we have those types of revenue that Mike had on his presentation, and for the most part, we'll be breaking expenses down at their object level, highest object level: salary, benefits, material supply, service and charges, capital, and debt service. So, first and most fund to get into is the general fund. I won't spend a lot of time on revenue. Mike has hit this, I think, very well. So this is effectively the same chart that you saw in his presentation. Really nothing else to go with on there, other than it may be worth having discussions with some of these departments that estimate revenue to discuss whether those revenues should possibly be changed in the final budget. But once again, depending on where expenditures come in, obviously we have a very healthy fund balance carryover. It isn't necessary, so it just depends on how you want the revenues versus expenditures in a particular year to look. Moving on to expenditures. These are all the salary, benefits, material supplies, so on and so forth, for all departments within the general fund and their changes. Looks like I messed up my column there a little bit. Didn't catch that. So what I have done here is I provided a forecast number for each one of these, and I've provided a % increase from that forecast. So once again, the percentage is now a percentage increase from what was budgeted in 19, and it's what I forecast expenditures to be. You see obviously fairly significant increases all the way down the board, but most heavily in services and charges. And once again, that number is heavily impacted by a $3 million increase in road maintenance that is in the engineer's budget, which of course the engineer, when they do their presentation, can go into great level of detail with you on that.
Yeah, Brad, just Commissioner Lewis, that, if you look across services and charges, that's what you can see in 2016, it was 10 million. And the request this year is 21.6.
Oh,
The
okay.
appropriation between the actual in 18 to the appropriation in 19 is actually when they made that change, that it wasn't a capital, but you can see that even though it's a service and charge, a lot of that work is performs like a capital, where it just doesn't get done in that year and it carries over to next. So that's where you can see and say that there's a big increase over the years there. So.
Salary's a big increase
Wow.
too.
Well, so salaries and benefits are a big increase, obviously much more than the 7 to 8% I would have expected, but to be perfectly honest, a vast majority of that increase is related to the sheriff's office increase that he has put in the budget. And of course, the sheriff is scheduled for Monday. So not first thing Monday, but pretty much your first presentation is, quite frankly, the one of the biggest to really dig into. So frankly, depending on where the sheriff's budget comes in, that will significantly impact the salary and benefits number. I have a summary at the very end of this memo that goes over other position requests in the general fund, and you'll see they're minimal. I'm not saying they should all be approved, I'm just saying they're minimal, so their impact on the budget is nowhere near.
Well, the benefit increase would be tied to the salaries as well.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Another thing too, and when I was looking at this too, the increased percentage is based on the forecast and not the budget from last year. So this includes what I would consider to be unfilled positions as well. And I know philosophically, we've had discussion, if you haven't filled it, do you need it? But if, once again, the percentages are based on where we're forecasting them to complete.
That makes the number even more because the forecast figure we know is overstated. So it's not 19 based on.
Forecast is pretty accurate.
Yeah, my forecast at this point is pretty accurate. I mean, with only 2 months left in the year, and I took my forecast through the end of October, so I feel very confident, especially on the salary and benefits numbers.
Maybe I misunderstood you. I guess I thought you were talking about last year's budget. You were talking about the
No.
forecast.
For all intents and purposes.
My misunderstanding
No,
then.
it's fine. I don't want to say we should completely ignore what was budgeted in 2019, but I'm confident in saying, for the most part, if we focus on forecast and 2020 budget, that's really where our focus should be.
Misunderstood.
That's really representative of the baseline spending, you know, the actual spending. The budget was conservative on the expense.
So if we went off appropriations for last year, like on salary, Brad, your 19% is based on the 34 that we're projecting to spend.
Yeah.
It would be more probably like 12 if it was based on the appropriations. No, 12% is still a high percentage, but anyway.
And also, keep in mind, to Mike's point about salaries, that, and Don may be able to actually answer this question just from an HR perspective, but I know the sheriff has recently filled a number of positions that, of course, to some degree, won't be reflected in my forecast, although they won't have a significant impact with only 2 months left. If you were to bring those on January 1st versus, say, November 1st, that's, to Mike's point, would make a significant impact on the forecast, therefore decreasing that percentage increase. But once again, a vast majority of this increase and/or unfilled positions are really in the sheriff's office, which once again, he will be going in detail on Monday, I can promise you that. We've had a number of conversations with the sheriff, myself and Karen both, and he's prepared to go through his positions, quite frankly, one by one, with you on Monday.
I could just editorialize a bit. This is why I've been pushing for forecasts, so you have a much better feel for what are they actually spending versus what was budgeted a year ago. And that's a much better base comparison, actual spending versus what was budgeted, and again, conservatively, pretty consistently.
Yeah, it's my misunderstanding. When he said it, when he spoke, I thought he was talking about last year's budget number, so I misunderstood.
But this is why
Yeah.
forecasting is so important, and we've started doing that. And
You'll actually
it's
see
very
in
helpful.
later expenditure charts that I've actually deleted the 2019 appropriations column because I didn't want it to be confusing. I left it in this one just because this was a high level and wanted you to see that. But the pie chart down below breaks down your general fund budget. This is directly from OpenGov, by the way, so very nice to be able to just boom, print that and stick it in a document. I do want to make a quick note here. These amounts do include capital requests. So the sheriff's office budget is actually not 29 million. It's closer to 27.7, I think is what the final number is. Obviously, it's in your book here. But that, like I said, includes his capital request. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail, especially next Wednesday when we have our capital presentation. But in short, people make their capital requests in the capital outlay and equipment line item in their submitted budget. You will ultimately decide which capital items you approve and don't approve. Once those approvals are made, those amounts will then move to the transfer line item, which is 580, and then will be transferred to the appropriate capital fund to then ultimately be expended. So the expense will still come out of the general fund, it just changes line items. So that's the reason, for example, the sheriff shows 29 million here. Mike saw this yesterday and he's like, why is that 29 million? You're messing this up, son. And I was like, oh no, what happened? And then I went to Karen and Karen was like, Brad, you forgot about capital. I'm like, oh yeah. And that's why we need Karen. I don't, I'm just flopping around, So anyway, that's what the breakdown is. Not surprisingly, sheriff, obviously 24% of the budget, but if you include the courts, a prosecuting attorney and so forth, that's where you really see a significant part of our budget, of course, for police and justice. The engineer at 23%. I don't want to call this misleading, but it's this is the way that obviously Delaware County handles road capital projects coming out of the general fund. In some places, you would more likely see that out of a special revenue fund or even a capital fund itself. So, but this is accurate in terms of how it is paid for out of Delaware County. So 23% of the budget is effectively spent on roads because most of his operational expenses, if not all, are paid from his special revenue funds, motor vehicle gas tax.
switching that to a capital fund would make the analysis of this a lot easier because a lot of stuff we talk about is capital spending not happening, and, because it appears like when you see it in the general fund, like it's an operating revenue, it's not.
It does create massive swings in the general fund from especially appropriations to actual expenditures. Board of Commissioners at 34%, obviously that includes everything that goes through your org key, or multiple org keys for that matter, and those include things like transfers and whatnot. So keep in mind, you guys aren't necessarily spending 34% of the budget on your operations. Like I said, the capital spending comes out of that number, and various other
Well,
things.
I'm assuming EMS and all those come out of that number as well. It'd be
Yeah.
good to have a breakdown how you get to the 42.
Yep, I do break that down later in the document. I think so at the top of the page 4, we talked about the major line item increases and why you're seeing that. As I noted, special revenue agency internal service funds really don't provide a benefit to be evaluated at the fund class level. But of course, if there are funds that aren't discussed later in the document, that includes all the tabs with the special revenue and, once again, any of these funds, I'll be happy to print you reports or graphs or charts or whatever you would like. Just feel free to let me know. Capital funds, so these are, these are all the capital funds. So this includes not only the 3 major capital funds that you pay for projects out of, but also the ditch capital funds are in here, which of course make a much smaller percentage of the total, but they are in these amounts. There obviously will be more expenditures from these funds in 2019, so it's difficult for me to know exactly how much will be spent, but Karen obviously stays on top of the projects that come out of our funds, so we should be pretty accurate. But the approved 2020 projects haven't been made yet. So in other words, the appropriations made for 2020 in these funds and the estimated revenues, because the revenues once again come from the general fund and yet to be approved, are both a little off. But I think this is a good way to at least see how revenue and ultimately expenditures have been made over the last several years from the capital funds. So going back to 16 and 17, there were quite a large amount spent out there. I wasn't here, but I'm assuming that was related to the courthouse finishing up. And obviously, we're going to see that ramp up into 2020. Obviously, we're continuing to pay on the historic courthouse, but a majority of those payments will be made in 2020, correct?
Yes.
And then ultimately, the Bixby campus should start, but once again, it'll probably be similar to the historic courthouse. It really won't start being worked on until later in the year. But once again, 2021, we would expect to see some significant.
What's the expectation again for the historical courthouse? I forget when that's supposed to be open.
Mid-year, I think.
Yeah, give or take June. June is our
Okay.
rough
Okay.
month.
Okay. Alrighty, thanks.
And that's done. I wouldn't say necessarily moved in. So
Okay.
hopefully sometime in
Early
June or
summer.
July. We're going to make sure to move in the very hottest days of the year. So.
Yeah, 90, yes.
In raining.
95.
And raining, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll call facilities down when it's a summer thunderstorm. The next type of funds that we can look at, once again, in total class are the debt service funds. These are fairly easy to estimate revenue and ultimately what the expenditures are. I think I talk about later, but I can't remember specifically. But it's a good place to just say, once again, we just refunded two of our bonds that were outstanding that were going to expire in 2025. Those bonds are still set to expire in 2025, but we got a much lower interest rate. The interest rate is 1.78%, and in total, from today until 2025, we will save a total of $500,000 in interest.
That's great.
So with that, why would debt service go up next year?
Oh, you mean the expenditures?
Yeah.
Well, this also includes debt service related to ditches as well, right?
And the courthouse.
And the courthouse,
The new.
Courthouse would have been in the 2019.
yeah. But they go up every year, the payments. At least that's what I saw on the bond documents. The payments are not consistent each year. They go up.
And this came straight from the amortization schedules, where these figures came from on the
Okay,
amortization schedules.
okay.
We can, of course, if that's something you'd like to see in more detail,
Yeah,
we
I
can break that
didn't
down.
realize we had different debt service levels. I thought it was fixed payment debt.
Yeah, even these new bonds, when I looked up the detail, which like I said, I looked up the details, so I must have put that in here somewhere. I noticed that the payments escalate.
Okay.
Not by
Was that
half a million each year.
20, how long was the bonds on the courthouse? 20 years? 30?
I think they're 30.
30?
Yeah, those are 30. But in all fairness, if we keep, I don't know when the first callable date on those bonds are. I mean, obviously, that's a little ways out, but it's entirely possible we will be able to refinance those in the future as well and save some money. It'll just depend on what interest rates are and when they're callable and so forth. But yeah, Karen will pull those as specific debt service
Okay.
amortizations and get those to you.
$1 million increase when you've refied and save 100,000, that's a big change.
Yeah,
With no new debt planned, at least no new debt budgeted. So, anyway,
yep.
we can dig into
We
that.
will dig into that.
Okay.
Well, and wait a minute, let me check something here. Well, those are appropriations.
This is what you.
Appropriations, yeah, so.
Okay, yeah, when it was, yeah,
When we're not issuing
okay,
any new debt, we
I
have a
noticed that
refi reduced.
appropriations didn't
yeah,
include
okay, yeah.
Also, keep in mind that I'm just looking at my appropriations column, and I'm obviously thinking that that isn't on her, well, wait a minute, do we not appropriate until the payment's ready to be made?
No, it should be there. I don't know why it didn't pull correctly.
Yeah, something didn't pull correctly. But in all fairness, my forecast may actually be a little low, just based on some final payments in the end of the year too, so just something to keep in mind. But like I said, we'll get that level of detail and get that to you.
Okay.
Enterprise funds, which are in this county, all related to the sewer district. Of course, Tiffany will be coming in at some point in the next couple weeks to go over those funds in detail, so I won't spend a lot of time digging into that. But what I will say is that, to keep in mind that obviously they're going to see the COLA increase plus the 27th pay, and they should have significant amounts in capital spending as well.
When we, again, really applaud everyone looking at the debt for potential refis. When we do that, do we look at the sewer debt as well for potential refis there?
In all fairness, I don't know for certain. We will confirm that, but my assumption is yes, but.
The last one, when we got the credit rating, we refinanced some debt then.
That was a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember doing a presentation for the Moody's and the others.
Yeah, and that's great.
Yeah,
but
we should,
debt-
we definitely should be looking.
Debt should be an annual review,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
just like any other budget.
Of all the bonds.
Yeah, of all the bonds that we
Yeah.
have, whether it's,
Natural,
Yeah, and I can tell you right now that we do have some bonds that are callable next year that we
Right.
are looking at, so.
but that's general obligation.
It is, so,
No, and that's a good point that we should, we need to discuss with the sewer district, because I think, their long-range capital plan is to pay for about 50% cash and the other 50%
Some
bond.
additional borrowings, yeah.
I think we were focusing on the big projects to bond, but, Tiffany just, was in here yesterday about a pump station project that's going out that I probably were gonna pay cash for, but the rates are so good right now, maybe we should look at,
And it could be that there's some options to pay off early, but you could also package it and borrow a little more, so.
we'll save that, that'll be a good curveball we can throw at them when they come in here. They won't be expecting that. It'll be a good one weekend.
Don't let them
Don't
know.
anybody, yeah.
Don't let-
just
oh, yeah,
See how they respond to that one.
Hopefully, they're not watching.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Is the plan to bond Bixby, or we're going to do that out of general cash?
no, we will be bonding Bixby.
Courthouse for paying out.
Courthouse is cash, yes.
Which, again, with big picture, I'd love to see a 5-year cash flow projection so we know, how much debt makes sense for Bixby and
Sure.
when and so on. So,
Yeah.
a long-range financial plan.
Yeah, and the good thing is that I did see some documentation, I can't remember when I saw it specifically, but the engineer, I think it's just when we sat down with him, but anyway, what the engineer will be presenting at their presentation, and I think that they're going to give a really good overview of what funds they have available to them out of the general fund and how they expect to spend it over the next 5 to 7 years. And that will effectively tell us what's
Yeah.
left in the general fund that could be spent.
They did a good job of that the last couple of years. They've
Yeah.
done some really good projections. Now, again, they tend to be overly optimistic in terms of what they can get done and when, but still, it's a very good projection and a good discussion that ought to feed into a total financial plan.
Yeah. All right, so now we're down to department level. And I'm just going to move right into the Commissioner's office, because once again, most of the departments with significant impacts on the general fund and special revenue funds and so forth will be coming in and doing budget presentations, but I do discuss some of those a little bit later. But in the general Commissioner's office case, what you see below, so in that first paragraph, you see everything that's in the Commissioner's office. So we have 2 work keys, admin and general, EMS, land and buildings, code compliance, human services, public defender, county garage, human resources, record center, and finally, public relations. So
Where's economic development?
economic development is in a special revenue fund.
Okay.
Now, you fully fund the economic development fund with general fund. Obviously, they do get some small amount of revenues in from other places, but a vast majority of their funds is general fund. And that is a transfer from the general fund. So it is included in your, it would be in the expenditures under transfers, but
So is the economic development, is it in that 42 million?
should be.
In that
pie
But it'd be under the 580 transfers versus salary, benefits, so on and so forth. It is worth saying that I would actually make the case potentially at some point in the future that no longer be treated as special revenue fund, maybe rolled back into the general fund at some point. There's no special revenues that they receive that I'm aware of that need to go into a special revenue fund, which is generally why you have a special revenue fund. They need to be accounted for separately, those revenues, either by federal law or state law or local purview. Once again, it's not that big a deal. We know where they're at and how to find them, but it's just, it does come out of the general fund, and what other revenues they receive would be perfectly appropriate to receive into the general fund, but something to consider for some point in the future. So the Commissioner's office, the revenues going down the line, some of these revenues are estimated by our department. Actually, I think all these revenues, because I took out the taxes, I think all these revenues are estimated by our departments, correct? So we have estimated revenue of 8.9 million. Year-to-date, we've collected 7.3. In all fairness, outside of predicting taxes, it's pretty difficult to predict some of these revenues, so I don't have revenue forecasts broken down for each of these line items. But once again, if you look at the year-to-date compared to the 2019 estimates, and then compare that to the 2018 actual, I would say we are going to at least equal what we collected in 2018. So I would not say that we have any risk of collecting less. And then the 8.9 million estimated in 2020 follows the, quote, very, very conservative route.
The first one, fees and charges for services, we're projecting 2.3 million for 2019, but we've got almost 2.6. What would drive that? Do you know off the top of your head?
I imagine that's mostly EMS, I would say, correct?
Is it soft billing or is
soft
that
billing.
code, where's code compliance?
Oh, and code compliance, okay.
Or do they come in license and permits?
Let's take a look. So code compliance, let's see, they represent of that amount $450,000. And EMS, oh, they're way in the back.
EMS should be able to.
And
do.
EMS represents 1.2 million of that estimate. So we're up to 1.6. I have to dig where the rest of it's coming from.
That's fine. No need to dig into it now, but that was just one of those
Make a
things.
note, though, we'll dig into that. That's why Karen's got her notepad here. Anything you want us to dig into, we'll dig into.
Right.
And I do have my computer here, if there's something you want to know right away, I've got OpenGov up and all that stuff. But once again, from an overall standpoint, I would say 8.9 is a very fair estimate for 2020. Going on to expenditures, go into a lot more detail here, but once again, you see the, each line item broken down at the object code. Once again, don't get hung up on the capital outlay of an increase of 5,954%. Once again, that once you make final approvals for those amounts move down to the 580 line item where you see a decrease. So those two, just know they kind of flip-flop. But obviously, salary benefits increasing at basically what amounts to 16, 18% is obviously above what we would expect, but I talk a little bit about that below. We'll go into that here. Materials and supplies, services and charges increases are something, once again, we'll also go into in a little bit more detail. And once again, what's below that 540, 560 and on down isn't of concern. They're numbers that are reasonable. So talking about the bullets at the bottom here, expenditures, we would expect to see roughly a 7.4% increase in the payroll line items, a little bit less in benefits, just because benefits isn't directly, obviously, all related to payroll. A lot of that is, actually, a vast majority of it is related to health insurance. Now, obviously, we had a very small increase in health insurance, but obviously, if we're projecting new staff, then it's, I assume, the norm to put that in for a family plan, quote unquote, worst case scenario in terms of cost. So that's why benefits as a higher percentage increase than the salary line item. I already talked about capital outlay. So while the cost of doing business increases each year, I'm reading the third bullet word for word, the increases in materials and supplies and services as charged should be reviewed by individual departments to ensure these are accurate amounts, especially compared to the 2019 forecast. I think it's fairly safe to say that the 2019 appropriations, were conservative the other direction when it comes to expenditures. In other words, they appropriated high, spend low. So there might be some, for lack of a better term, right sizing that can happen in those line items. But once again, keep in mind, the biggest spenders in those departments, in these line items, will be coming in and speaking to you. So once again, we can break those down in detail.
So the ones that aren't coming to speak to us, we can assume that just basically pretty much the traditional increases you would expect, salary increases, et cetera. There's nothing going to be out of the norm that should be brought to our attention.
I would say the two biggest changes that I know of are related to code compliance and EMS. EMS obviously is working on a very extensive long-range plan, not unlike what the sheriff has worked on. So they will come in and go over those details and why some of their, particularly materials and supplies, services, and charges are increasing. Code compliance is requesting the additional inspectors. Inspectors cost money just beyond their salary. They need vehicles, they need supplies, they need support in terms of their computer programs, iPads, the whole bit. So I would say between those two departments is where you're seeing a majority of the increase in materials, supplies, and services and charges increasing from 19 to 20. Once again, Mike brought this up earlier, but the new staff in 2019 aren't necessarily accounted for in total in my forecast, because obviously my forecast only takes up when they started. So that's another reason you would see the 15% and 17% increases. Once again, not all of it, of course, but part of it. We, of course, the two most significant ones that I can speak to are in the Commissioner's office, of course, Eric was brought on later in the year, and then, of course, Marissa started later in the year. So, you know, those full years are going to add percentage points on top of the 7.4.
We were already paying 90% of Eric's anyway.
Yeah, that was one of the points I had, was there should be a reduction in the
So there should have
prosecutor's
been-
charge.
Other than his increase, there should have been pretty much a wash.
The prosecutor, obviously, once again, has a plan that she's working on. I don't want to go into too much detail on it, but when we sat down with her, Karen and I did, it was a great conversation. And she will be wanting to hire a new attorney in 2020, but she admits that she is waiting to decide where she would want to put that attorney, whether it's civil or criminal. But I believe in her presentation, she has a hire of a new attorney, give or take somewhere mid-year, so.
But as my point was, as it relates to our fund, commissioners, it's, other than the increase, should be close to a wash, because we were already funding 90% of it.
In total, yes. Yep. So then moving on to the next chart, this is where I took each of the significant org keys. I did combine some org keys with code compliance, facilities, and I did another two. It's not remembering. Maybe it's human resources. And combine some org keys there, but in short, this represents what you're seeing, once again, which is a percentage increase based on forecast, not appropriations. In all fairness, I thought I deleted appropriation columns here. I must have changed my mind and went back and added them, so I wanted to give you more data, not less, I guess. So anyway, the departments with these significant increases are obviously going to, for the most part, be presenting. EMS is presenting, facilities is presenting, code compliance is presenting. Public defender is not presenting, but their increase, obviously, I believe is reasonable, because most of that is charges for services as those continue to increase. But of course, we are getting more reimbursed, as we all know. So those amounts are just going on the revenue side. Human resources is presenting along with Record Center, I believe, correct?
Yes.
And then finally, public relations is not presenting, but as you could see, their increase is not really out of line when you consider Marissa's salary is included in there now. 50% of it anyway is in the public relations, 50% of it's in commissioner's admin, correct?
Yes.
So I really am not worried about the percentage increase in public relations. Plus, Jane is obviously continuing every year to increase what she does in terms of public relations, so there's increased materials and supplies and services and charges coming out of her line. But once again, we will be speaking to all of these in detail in the coming weeks. And then final page of the memo is regarding the Commissioner's Office staffing changes. So I highlight those below in bullets. So in the Commissioner's Administration, I already discussed the attorney and staff assistant. Record Center, they're looking at doing, and I don't want to speak for Dawn, but I believe it looks like a staff promotion, kind of a small reorganization there. And exactly, yeah, we saw that on the sheet. So they would be looking at bringing someone up to effectively a second in command, a lead, but once again, not backfilling the position. And then there's an intern on there. You can see the math there as it's done. Land and buildings, facilities, however you want to refer to that, a new painter and general maintenance worker. And you can see the general maintenance worker has a hire date of roughly 50% through the year. Human resources, once again, obviously we'll be speaking in detail, but you can see the breakdown there of how the positions fall out. Code compliance, new inspector, new deputy director. I don't know off the top of my head if the deputy director would be once again, hired from within and not backfilled or anything along those lines. I would expect Fred to talk in detail about that. And then EMS, we have a new assistant chief, reorganization of the captain's positions as requested, longevity payment, and half the salary for a shared mental health clinician with the mental health board. So, quite frankly, a fairly manageable list of staffing changes to go through, once again, as you do your budget department discussions. So, I know, I actually didn't compare last year to this year, but I believe this is actually less than what was requested last year from the commissioner's office. So, and I can tell you just from what we're seeing in the other offices, once again, outside of the sheriff's office, I'm not seeing any significant staffing changes. As I said, I already discussed the prosecutor to a small degree. The auditor has obviously done some reorganization in light of Jane leaving, but they'll be here on Monday.
Recorder is coming.
Recorder is, for the first time in several years, wants to add a staff person, but we've scheduled them for a budget hearing specifically for that. When we found out they were adding a staff person, we're like, well, it's a good time to come in and talk to you, because I don't think they've been here in a while. Let me see here, and I'm really just focusing on general fund. Economic development, of course, has seen a significant amount of staffing changes in 2019. So actually, that would be a good one where you would look at and say, their 2019 forecast probably does not represent what 2020 would be if they had a full year of staffing at their current level. Facilities, we already discussed. Engineer, he'll be in, but I don't recall any personnel changes, and with what we discussed that with them. I don't know the details on the environmental services, but once again, they're coming in, and then code compliance we already talked about. So I think all in all, once again, I'm not sitting here and saying, hey, give everyone the staff they want. I'm just saying, I think what is being presented to you is a very reasonable number for consideration. It's not no one, in my opinion, has looked at the revenues of the general fund and said, hey, it's time to add 5 staff people, except for the sheriff.
And I just wanted to add on, I would, when you, not caution maybe is the right word, but when you look at the percent increase column to the far right, I want to pick human resources and safety, for example. Their appropriation in 2019 was $997,000. The forecast is $714,000.
Oh, good job.
The request actually went down in 2020, but it shows a 34% increase. Pam left, and that hasn't been, filled. There was a vacant position, or there was a new position that wasn't filled. They went through the process and didn't find the right people. So I would just, I would call it, and we're doing a lot more with wellness and other activities. So just, once again, it's good to have the increased data. If the forecast is a really true and accurate, number of what's the needs are, just, once again, data always has a caveat of where you're at with it, so.
So after that is the schedule of events coming up. Maybe we'll get lucky and kind of like the community enhancer grant, some of these people might bring in food or donuts or something. Hint, hint, to anyone watching the television program. I actually thought about that today, but then I forgot. That's why I bring it up, and hopefully someone comes up with it in my mistake. Dawn, maybe when you do yours, there you go. She loves me for putting her on the spot like that. I want to move on to the metrics tab, just to kind of go over some of the things that you're seeing in here. So the first document is the 2019 General Fund Expenditure Forecast. This is the document that I've sent to you in previous months, but for the sake of this budget presentation, I did clean it up a little bit, compressed it so it isn't all goofy looking because of when one solution prints out the report. But this report date I did as of, yesterday. So I feel very confident that the salary numbers are, at this point, almost right on. We only have 4 payrolls left, unless there's some massive use of overtime. that obviously is a little bit more difficult to predict in the next couple months. These salary numbers are really right on. Materials and supply services and charges, once again, because I did the report yesterday, didn't really pick up everything from the month potentially, but I still don't see massive changes in any of those numbers, with the exception, and I should have put page numbers on this, I apologize, but it is on very, very last page of the forecast, under road and bridge projects. Again, and I've said this in the past, but I still obviously don't know where it's going to come in at. I am forecasting the engineer to spend all his money. Obviously, he's not going to spend all his money, but I have absolutely no idea what amount of money he will spend. So it is very safe to say that the 107 million in general fund expenditures that I have forecasted will be, I will go so far as to say significantly lower. It'll just depend on where the engineer's office comes in, and obviously projects are finishing up, we're near the end of paving season and so forth, and those bills will start coming in, I imagine, pretty hot and heavy. And so the amount of money spent through the year so far, particularly that 13 million in capital and outlay in road and bridge, will increase, but like I said, it is not going up to 21 million. I would expect the services and charges, once again, this is that road maintenance number, to make, probably get somewhat closer to the 3 million, but maybe I'm wrong. The next page is your sales tax forecast. Once again, I've emailed this to you in the past. This is not any update from what was most recently emailed to you. This includes through October. So you can see we budgeted 61 million, and I'm forecasting 64 million. Once again, going back to what was estimated for 2020, that was 65 million was what was estimated. So once again, going back to that very, very conservative number, I really don't see us coming in at 65 million in 2020 if this year's 64.8. So, and once again, I feel very confident about that number because my spreadsheet, not because it's so good, although, really, it's because I do take into account the cyclical nature of sales tax in my prediction. So I do feel very good about that number. The next page includes something Jeff had asked a couple days ago, just at the highest of levels. This is the general fund estimated revenues in the preliminary budget, once again emphasize that, and the total appropriations requested. So you can see a deficit of 20.1 million at this time. So once again, I would certainly advocate for some of those revenues to be increased, but that's not necessary to obviously meet our budgetary requirements, because we obviously have a very healthy fund balance. But I would expect those appropriations requested, the 123 million, to drop through the budget
I
process.
just make a statement, to me it's obvious, but we need to spend what we need to spend, not what we have to spend. So, just seems obvious to me, but just for the record.
Sure. I went ahead and did a similar chart for the enterprise funds. Just felt this would be helpful going into that discussion. Once again, as you can see, similar to the general fund, in a vast majority of expenditures made, or not vast majority, but a very significant portion are made for capital purchases and construction. Same way with the enterprise fund. So once again, shows a deficit, but you can see at the very top there, their 540 capital outlay is 31 million. So if they weren't building plants or systems and all those things Mike knows about, they'd be obviously making money, which is the whole point of enterprise funds.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to our conversation earlier, maybe right now that's being paid with cash. I mean, the cash reserve and the enterprise is just the regional sewer, right? Yeah, I mean, the cash reserves in the regional sewer was higher than the general fund. So I think that could be a discussion about whether to. Now, on our capital for the general fund or this, if we're gonna bond it, does that show as a revenue on here, or is that, okay?
Not at this time.
That's an important schedule that we need to have, is the cash available, so we can show the general fund has ramped up over the last couple of years.
Sure.
In anticipation of spending more. Same with the sewer fund.
Yeah, fund balance report. Actually write that down. In all fairness, I actually think a fund balance report would have been a very good thing to have as part of this memo. Don't know why I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
That's why we have you, Jeff, to keep me in line, when Mike doesn't. Then when I really fall through the cracks, Gary shows up in my doorway and really lets me have it. So. The next line item here is just, or next page rather, are some of these items that you guys pay for out of the general fund, but like to see broken down into their individual line items, if you will. So you can see OSU Extension has a little bit of an increase. That information actually is included right after this page. OSUs, they are not scheduled to come in for a presentation, so that Aaron was good enough to add that sheet to this document. Soil and water, I would say that's a reasonable increase. Or not increase, actually, just reasonable, because they are staying flat. So unless you had an issue giving them the 324 this year, I would say that would be fairly good for next year. For the community enhancement grants, we spend 106, or scheduled to spend. Some projects still need to be paid, correct?
Well, this includes all of them.
I know, I'm just saying, but we still have some that
I
are
think
outstanding.
there's 3 of them
Yeah.
haven't invoiced us so far.
But you approved 168,515. We put 175 in there, just figured a modest increase, but once again, that'll come down to that program and approvals and so forth. But that gives us some appropriations to work with. And then finally, the Trail Assistance Program. We could discuss this in some level of detail later on if you'd like. But Karen and I had a really good meeting with Scott with Regional Planning about this. Obviously, Jenna, out of our office previously,
Yeah.
really kind of led the charge with this. We had a good conversation with Scott saying, hey, look, I think you really need to kind of take this up now and really push these things through and let us know where these projects are at. And the good news is that he is doing exactly that. He is getting information to us, getting us pictures, getting us proof of construction and so forth. But one of the conversations we did have was about these projects that have been approved and are just keep getting carried over, and finally saying, look, we probably need to have a discussion about these projects in general, putting some timelines on them, just kind of basically discussing the program, not really terribly different than what we did with the community enhancement program, coming up with some more defined guidelines that we can then hand out to these communities and say, if you would like these monies, here are the terms and conditions, if you will.
Sure.
So we're working with Scott on that, but once again, that the 2020 request is carrying forward these projects that we believe still are feasible and have been approved previously. And
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with those projects, the whole intent of the program, one of the intents of the program was so that, ODNR has a pretty good, I think it's the 319 program, and this allows communities to leverage. So the dollar amounts in here is not, it's being used to leverage, 80% more dollars, and I'm assuming that the programs and getting the grant funding from the state delays and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So,
right.
anyway.
Yeah.
I do believe in the, especially after sitting down with Scott, I believe in the program and believe it's something that we should continue to do, because once again, those monies turn into more dollars, as Mike just said. But once again, I do think the program needs to be defined a little bit better and figure out how to ensure that these projects are on a schedule, and that if they aren't completed by a certain period of time, that in effect, the project is not necessarily unapproved, but you pretty much have to come in and make a case for why you would want it, why it should continue to be an active project.
I can't remember if when we allocate a certain amount for a project, then is it a match, or it probably just varies. If we say 50,000 and then the project comes in under that or over that, then,
Yes, it varies from project to
okay,
project.
okay,
but
yeah,
Once
hard to
again, that'd be
say.
something that I would like to see defined, an area of which these are
Right,
the things you would
right.
potentially give money for.
Yeah.
These are the expectations for the money's usage.
The match could vary from project to project just based on a lot of circumstances they can't control, we can't control.
Right.
Yeah, and I do believe that, and Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe some of the issue with these projects is land acquisition. And one of the uses of this money was not for land acquisition.
Yeah, the way it was spelled out. in the-
Oh, really?
So that has been a stumbling block. That's one of the things that frankly, maybe we could discuss is, can some of these monies be used to purchase the land? Because the land is obviously step one.
Right.
But at the same time, that's up for further discussion. But that is what has delayed some of these projects is, yes, the money's there for construction, paving, gravel, groundwork, whatever, but ultimately, they still need to get the land.
Okay.
And now, going on from there is the department reports, going into, once again, level of detail. First one is capital, and once again, we'll be discussing that next Wednesday. The Commissioners tab does have all the Commissioners' departments, org keys, which does include special revenue funds, which, there's the ditch maintenance, litter grants, Ag Society excise tax. That's a good one to hit while we're here. So, once again, if nothing else, for the sake of the viewing audience, the Ag Society is continuing to move forward on the construction of their new building. I can't remember the name of that particular building off the top of my head.
They're not sure exactly what the final name is going to be. It's basically an ag center.
And they have gone out for bid, and based on that bid, they still need some work to do on that project. We have allocated, or appropriated rather, $3.4 million. That is very much a shot in the dark. Yeah, the building's going to be more. Let's be perfectly honest. The building's going to be more, but they need to work out some details in regards to how we fill that gap. And as a matter of fact, we're having discussions.
Is your 3.4, is that the construction cost, or is that,
3.4,
yeah,
we're actually just basing that on what the original estimate of the building was.
okay. So it's not what's already been appropriated, plus. I mean, this is the gross construction cost estimate at this point.
Yeah.
Because they've already appropriated some money for that building.
Yeah, but a lot of those monies have been
Yeah, cost more likely is going to be 4.5 to 5, for that building. And they're working on hopefully getting some horse barns done. They may start on the covered arena. They're debating some things, so.
Sure. In the end, they obviously do have a master plan. I believe that's been presented to you in the past, but it's clear that a lot of those numbers probably need a little refinement. And once again, going back to your point about a long-term plan and so forth. But of course, you guys will be delving heavily into the excise tax early next year, most likely, as those discussions about the renewal come into play. So more to come on that. So anyway, like I said, all the line items in here that are represented in this section are those org keys, rather, I keep calling them line items, org keys that are not going to be represented with their own special meeting. So we took out, once again, so looking at Commissioner's admin, you see salary increases 11.91%. Again, higher than 8%, but Karen utilized the salary spreadsheet that's provided by the auditor's office, which takes into account our present staffing. So I stand behind that 11.91%. There is not additional staffing in that number. So that obviously includes the COLA, 3.4% increase, and accounting for a full year of staffing.
And the wage study, because
Oh, yeah.
2019 appropriations did not include anything in the wage study. Affected by
Yeah.
the wage study.
And that goes across any departments, obviously, that were impacted by the wage study in a positive way. So that could account for some of the percentages as well. I forget, what are services and charges increase related to? I have to dig into that. We'll look into the services and charges. The materials and supplies shows a large increase, but percentage-wise, but it's $8,000. Training. That's a big part of that. You know where I did the detail on that? That was on that really great presentation that Marissa did.
Oh,
That is not being shown. That's where I did the detail on the debt service, and I discussed these points a little bit. So, but Mike has some fantastic ideas in regards to staff development and leadership training and so on and so forth, and those are in that services and charges line item. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that it accounts for $100,000, but there's a significant increase in there related to that. So that's the biggest part of that percentage increase. Commissioners General, materials and supplies, once again, has a large percentage increase, but not a huge dollar increase, $4,000 over their appropriations from last year. But services and charges, a 5.5% increase, very much in line with just cost of doing business increasing for various services and charges that we pay for. Next page is community relations, public information. Really that the salary increase is, once again, very reasonable, 9.5%, considering the 7.4 would just be the normal. And once again, the percentage increase there is just Marissa being here full-time all year at 50% of her salary. Did everyone catch that? Sales tax revenue fund, in all fairness, I don't actually know why this is assigned to our work key, because obviously the auditor projects that revenue, but it traditionally is under our org key, so that's what we printed, but I don't get too much into that. And then public defender, as you can see right there, their salary and is right in line with what we would expect it to be. Obviously, we have a lot on the table in regards to public defender, but I would anticipate no significant changes to public defender in 2020. If anything does happen, maybe it's late 2020, but certainly nothing that I'm accounting for in the budget. My expectation is through 2020 that the public defender's office will remain as it currently is, staffed with 2 full-time and obviously still an appointing department.
Who does the revenue on that? Because the revenue did not
Yeah.
change.
That was one thing I would have expected.
Yeah, the revenue stayed.
Oh, you know what, that's just on us. Blame me,
Okay.
and then I'll blame Karen. And I'll blame me.
Yeah, I need something to talk to you about later, so
Yeah.
that'll be one of the things.
You gotta make that list of things I need to fix before
That's
I.
substantially off.
Huh?
That's substantially off.
Yeah. In all fairness, I didn't even think about the fact that the revenues had increased with the new percentages. And the crazy part is I had actually done those numbers for that meeting. So I've got a spreadsheet that tells me what all those numbers are. So now we'll get that fixed in the final budget. So, hey, a little bit more revenue coming in the general fund.
When does that come in, the revenue from the state on the public defender?
Like
When?
monthly? Monthly,
Has it started, though?
yes.
Oh, it
October's.
Started
the
in
reimbur-
October?
Yeah,
Oh, it
reimbursement
did
we
start
just
in
got is actually
October.
at 70%.
Ah,
I
okay,
confirmed that with Elisa yesterday.
okay,
So yep, it started in October, just as promised.
okay, great.
County Home, Court of Appeals, and Municipal Court, those are all contractual, consistent items, really nothing to go in through there. And then once again, beyond that, we're into special revenue funds and
ditch
That-
portfolio.
Those are debt, yeah. And then we're in the ditches and debt and so forth. Feel free to review at your leisure, but once again, there's nothing in there that gave us pause or concern in terms of their increases or changes. Karen did a great job, obviously, filling in a lot of those numbers. Well, I talked for 16 minutes more than I thought I would, but that's pretty normal for me, if you know, talk to my wife. So, any questions, comments, concerns at this point? Obviously, like I said, we've made a list to this point, and we will get that information and email it / give it to you, insert it into the book. That's another thing, too. Feel free to take the books home if you really need some light reading material. But we, like last year, will probably inevitably be adding pages to the book. Nothing like last year, because obviously you have all of the reports for the entities that are coming in. But, to answer some of your questions, we might like to go ahead and insert it into the book. So if you come in and see a 3-hole punched piece of paper on your desk, that's why.
This is a good weekend because Oklahoma and Ohio State are on a bye, so we all have a
Still got a lot of time to look
we have
at.
2 or 3 hour window
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Jeff's going
opportunity.
to come in
this
with a
weekend.
legal pad full of notes.
Well, Jane knows where to find my book. If I do take it home, I'll bring it back every day.
Oh, yeah. I'm just,
I do have just to make you aware, Jennifer and I did not communicate very well. I'm not sure whose fault it was, maybe it's mine, maybe it's hers, but Tuesday's before Elections Day, so I will not be here for the Tuesday meeting.
Oh, that's right.
I wondered that, but then, that's right, yeah.
But I am going to make I talked to the Board of Elections about just having an early lunch hour, so I'm going to come to the groundbreaking.
Which
home
hearing is on?
Quick
Economic
appearance and all that
development.
stuff.
the only one scheduled for Tuesday.
Home road
Home road.
groundbreaking extension.
Could we move that to another time?
10:30 Tuesday, I think it's 10:30
During our
Tuesday.
budget hearings?
No, we've got a gap there.
Oh, okay.
I think they said to start about 10:40, I'm going to leave about 10:15, and
Oh,
half an
shoot.
hour, I'll be back.
Yeah, I can't be, yeah, that's right, I couldn't do that. Okay.
Yeah, so Tuesday, the only budget hearing that is scheduled currently is economic development.
That's in the
Job and Family was on there, wasn't it?
That's Monday.
That's Monday.
Monday, okay, you're right, that's correct.
Economic development is in the afternoon.
It is, it's at 2:30. I mean, if there is a desire to move that, we could consider it, although obviously, your schedules have filled up to a certain degree on the other days, so, at least right off the top, I mean, maybe, come in,
The 6th, maybe after.
yeah, it could maybe come in. Wednesday, we have Bob Singer. Oh, yeah, we didn't put it on here just because it kind of flows with facilities, capital improvement, all that stuff anyway. Bob Singer, well, I sent you an email, but anyway, Bob Singer's coming in Monday, or Wednesday rather, give or take, I told him to be here at 10:45, so if we can get him in earlier, we can get him in. But don't worry, him and I are kindred spirits in our talking ability. So I did tell him that 11:30 is the end time for him, so limit the presentation, say 15 minutes, and that way you guys have plenty of time to ask him questions. But he
So
is-
I'm sorry, what date is he coming?
Wednesday, the 6th, give or take, at 11 a.m.
Okay,
If we can, basically, we're just going to start him as soon as we're done with facilities and capital.
okay.
So move him in.
We're asking Bob to come in to kind of give us a.
Right,
based on his
okay.
Work he's done.
Thanks, yeah.
If you could, if you get materials, presentation materials from the various presenters ahead of time, it really helps me to get a copy of that as soon as you get it, so that way I can be better prepared. So if they do
Yeah.
send it to you ahead of time, that'd be greatly appreciated if you could get it to us.
I do know, and in all fairness, I think the sheriff will be bringing a significant amount of detail in the form of a handout, but I did get a presentation from the sheriff I'll go ahead and forward to you, but it's, frankly, deals mostly with his capital request, but at least you have that part of it. I don't know that we have anybody else's presentation, but certainly we can pass that information on to those who are scheduled and say, hey, when the presentation's ready, send it on to us.
And under the prosecutors, they did submit some, like a little memo and stuff, so that's in your book and with
Yeah.
the prosecutors, so. Like she submitted 3 different documents, so they're all there, so.
I think EMS submitted like 30 pages.
So we didn't put
But we did put in his, at the very back of this page, he went into a lot of detail on his individual line items and their requests, so while not what he will obviously present, but just a good detail level there as well. So some, not all of the documents that are included in here have some detail. Those that utilized OpenGov did a great job. There's a little box there you can fill in real easy, text box, put in information. A lot of people utilize that. So I anticipate next year when we go all out with OpenGov for all departments, we'll see really nice details be added to the budget. Excuse me, that can be printed and added to this document with ease.
Okay, all right.
Someone mentioned, since I kind of created the situation, I'll work around it, but about possibly moving the economic development, was there a date being recommended for that, or?
Well, just based on what's in the book in terms of what's available, it looks like Tuesday, November 19th, after EMS at 3 o'clock is still available, and Wednesday morning at 9:30 a.m. I'm certainly willing to talk to Bob Lamb and see if he could.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. I think Bob has, not necessarily staffing requests, but some initiatives like the 23 corridor and other things like that that are in his budget, so I think it'd be good to.
So what were you suggesting?
Well, if you look at your schedule on the back page, there are 2 blocks of time the week of the 18th. So suggesting either Tuesday, the 19th at 3 o'clock, or Wednesday morning, the 20th at 9:30 or 10 even.
I thought a possibility, what about the 13th after recorder? She wouldn't typically take very long.
It's really up to you guys.
I'm just throwing that out as you said the 18th is another possibility?
The 19th at 3:30, the 20th at 9:30 a.m.
I didn't hear that.
I didn't, the night, you said, Jen, the 19th at
3:30.
3:30?
That's going to be economic development?
No, I still need to confirm. with
We're
Bob.
just
She-
trying to figure it out here.
Throwing it
Let me look.
The 20th, the
schedule.
20th at 9:30 in the morning, I don't think it's gonna work.
Yeah, I have a 10 o'clock Records Commission.
But we have Regional Planning Executive Committee.
So the 20th doesn't look. Okay.
If,
So,
if
the
Wednesday-
19th at
Does the
3:30?
19th work?
Let me double check it. I might be.
I don't know if Bob's around.
I
Yeah,
have budgets all day that day, so I think I have on my calendar.
yeah. On the 19th at 3:30, that works for me. We'll just have Bob
We'll make
tell
it-
him,
Bob can make it work.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll just make sure to tie him to his desk that morning and, he'll,
It's,
Yeah.
with the groundbreaking, the next week anyway, it's probably better for him not to have it in the afternoon.
Okay, 3:30.
yeah.
I will not be at the work session either, but I have seen the presentation when they had it First Commonwealth a couple weeks ago, and I saw the abbreviated version.
Yeah.
So, and I did talk to Steve Cochler, and I said if there's anything additional, so that's,
Yeah.
and my apologies.
Okay.
So economic development, the 19th at 3:30.
Yes,
Tell Bob to be there or he won't get any money.
that's right.
I like it.
Yep. Okay. Trying to think if there was any, there's the 4th. Okay, so the 5th, we are just going ahead, okay, with that non-budget work session. Was that the 23
corridor.
quarter study? Okay,
I'll be here in spirit.
okay. Is that the only thing we have then?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you planning a party? I'll come.
Gosh. I don't know. So we're bringing everybody in just for that 1:30 on the corridor study. Can that be done at another time?
I mean, it's
It
already been,
wasn't my idea to do it that day. So we can move it to a different day. I would have to check with Mr. Kuckler, I believe, is,
Yeah. Why don't we see if that can be moved, because that's the only thing, the budget thing that we have that day. On Wednesday,
It's going to be dependent on Steve's schedule.
let's see.
Is he bringing anybody with him?
No. Bob?
How long is that presentation? Do we know?
A half hour.
About a half hour? Boy, I think we should move it. Can we even move it?
I got it's going to be more than a half hour based on,
Oh, yeah,
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 I'd say it's going to be a minimum hour,
easily an hour. There's a lot of material there.
because they have a lot they want.
No. Yeah,
Well, I mean, I'm good at moving because I could be there, but I can't predict,
Yeah,
obviously what's in the book is literally just availability for budgets. So
Okay.
I can't speak to times available otherwise. That would be up to you.
yeah.
We'll work on rescheduling.
Okay.
that. I'm sure we can reschedule this, Steve.
Okay, yeah, okay, that sounds good. And so, what I just need to do is, Jen, recess until, we are going to recess this meeting until Monday, November 4th at 1:30 PM.